A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Fourth Estate. Charles Mongu Champagian with me in studio tonight, a panel of journalists to discuss the major events that dominated news headlines during the week. And of course, Uganda at 57. And a major debate. If you're 57 years old and across the African continent, countries that were colonized or taken in as protectorates as Uganda was, the biggest outcome of the independence struggle was political freedom, because there is still a lot of debate about how much economic freedom was attained. But on Independence Day, I had this debate somewhere. On Independence Day, someone who wants to stage a show cannot be allowed to get out of their gate and go and stage a show. So what independence was that? But also be looking at the other achievements, successes and failures of Uganda at 57. If Uganda was a person at 57, would you look at them and be proud of them? Would you say they have just grown in age? Have they actually made the advancements they should have made? And someone was asking, children grow. Millions of children are growing every day. Billions of children across the world are growing into adults, but are they actually making the advance they should be making given different circumstances? With me tonight, I have from the extreme end, Yusuf Serunkuma. Yusuf is a columnist with the Observer newspaper and an academic. Yusuf, always a pleasure to have you here.
I'm happy to be here too.
I have Dicta Simwe. Dicta is a senior writer with the East African newspaper. Dicta, very nice to have you.
Thank you.
I have Kenneth Anderson Lukwago. Kenneth Anderson Lukwago is a producer and a journalist at Radio 1.
Thank you for inviting me, Charles.
Yusuf, let me start from the extreme end. If you take a broader look of Uganda at 57, we had a huge celebration in Soronko. Rain tried to disrupt it, but we still have our guest, the President of Zimbabwe, Mnangagwa, being chief guest. He received this country's highest honor, and we had all the platitudes that come with the celebration of 57 years of independence. Could you help us and our viewers understand, put into context, what this 57 years means, especially from the political perspective?
Yeah, there's a joke that has been circulating recently about the Independence Monument, because it's holding a baby. And we're wondering whether that baby will ever grow up, whether a time will come, whether the monument has to be revised, and you have an adult standing in the place of a baby. And somebody said, maybe the baby is stunted. Maybe Uganda is supposed to be in a state of continuous babyhood and may never mature into an adult. So that was one of those jokes that appeared lately as independence was being celebrated. But if you take South Africa as an example, 1994, they got political independence. If you look at South Africa now, the question is over economic independence. And economic independence remains a big question for many of the African countries, and Uganda is not the exception, neither is South Africa. If you come back here, if you look at the last 57 years, you'll be plotting the major events that have happened in this period. And there are a couple of those that are notables. There are quite many events, but some that really had groundbreaking and radical changes happened to the country. If you remember the 1966 conundrum in which the central government had a face-off with Uganda, that remains one of the most significant events in the life of this country, and we continue to grapple with the aftermath of this period. And then my favorite is 1972, when after getting political independence, 10 years down the road, we were able to see a likelihood of economic independence, when Ugandans, native Ugandans, who had been relegated to the backwaters of the economy, had the opportunity to through an act that was described as madness, to come to the far front and run Kampala Road and Jinja Road and all the big economic centers in this country. That was a phenomenal period. And in my other life as a biographer, as a ghostwriter, I've had conversation with many of the men who have made decent money in this country. They'll tell you, we've been able to make this money because of what happened in 1972. It's not that the claim that the properties were stolen is not true, because actually the government nationalized and paid all those that were kicked out of this country. So
So you're talking about the main decree that expelled Asians out of this country.
Yeah.
Yes, and brought native Ugandans.
Yes.
To the main streets of Mbale, Jinja, Kampala, and these other towns.
It remains a very pivotal moment in the life of this country. That's when we had people producing actual work. People entered manufacturing. People started learning business by practice. Before, there were hands, there were extras to the Indians and Asians who had dominated the economy, getting a following from the colonial regime. So that moment remains pivotal. If you look at the rich men we have nowadays in this country, they're running after markets. They're basically gamblers or brokers, right? They're brokers broking for South African companies. Basically, the wealth that has been created in this country has the infrastructure of 1972. Other events you could think about include 1980, where we had a fake election. The 1980 election remains a significant event in the life of this country because we're still grappling with the idea of change of government from one state to the other in a peaceful way. 1980 remains a pivotal moment because it gave us the war, it gave us the NRM in 1986. So, and the other significant event that followed thereafter, 1986 was a period of so much hope. So 1995 gave us the Constitution, all right? And so we remained very confident that at least now we have the opportunity, relying on a Constitution which took 4 years to create. There was a commission that went around in this country asking for views, and the Constitutional Assembly, there was deliberations on the nature, on the ways in which this country should be governed. So we had a Constitution. You know, in the words of Professor Timos Wangusa, 1990 was the rise of the African new breed, right? And quickly it turned into a brood of autocrats, of dictators. All of a sudden we have autocracies that are only technical, right? They're not as crude as those of old. They're just technical, that the constitutions are amended to achieve the same ends that are mean declared life presidency.
Would you really, I look at the timeline you're outlining for us. What you call crude autocracy. What describes crude autocracy? If we could take stock of this country, where we come from, what happened in the 1970s when we had what is so-called crude autocracy? What happened between 1981 and 1985, 1986, that describes what you're talking about? But you could also stretch it back to what you're discussing earlier. Those significant political milestones. You have a constitution, a pre-independence constitution, crafted in Lancaster. Then you have the crisis in 1966, 1967, that produces its own constitution, called a pigeonhole constitution. Then you have the period between 1971 to 1979, and that period of political negotiation after 79 to 1980, the elections of December 10th, 1980, where we revert to the constitution that existed before. And then you have the making of a new constitution later. Now, if you pick those together and you're trying to craft the journey that this country has moved as an independent country, for a majority of this country's population that are young, for even the adults and the elderly people who have grown and were able to see some of these things, what kind of journey have we moved? Because those might appear as milestones. Where did they take us? Where did they leave us? We'll have a deeper discussion on the economic front. But I would appreciate if you could just take us through that before I come to dicta and say, this is the fundamental difference that we have seen.
So what the fundamental difference is a shift in the ways in which autocracy reproduces itself. While Idi Amin will declare life presidency, we have this time a leader who's governing for life, but he's elected several times. So that's a significant shift in the ways in which autocracies manifest themselves. While Idi Amin would have no constitutional government through decree, you have a noisy and messy parliament, which is equally big, which actually sits and can legislate over to perpetuate a regime that oscillates between autocracy and democratic governance. So that's been a major shift if you look at the 1986 period and then the period that came before. That's what I called crude autocracy, as opposed to the autocracy of experts, which is more technical and more expert-driven. That the ends are almost the same, but the ways in which it plays out is very, very different. And I think that's a major shift.
Victor, I want to come to you on this journey towards the journey to independence, the journey during independence, and where we are at the moment. Because very many people would ask the quality of our political independence, which to many people, most people would agree, is the only real semblance of independence that we have had. But many people still question, if you have spruced up the mansion, the governor's mansion, by the shores of Lake Victoria, you run things. Some people will say the same way. Only that post-independence Africa, most of it has tended to be more messy than the strong hand of the colonialist. Why is that so? Why would you think that?
So basically you're saying the color of the colonizer changed. And
maybe not.
no, because here's the thing, that so you have a group of people who is in power. You also know that Ugandans basically have no control of who is in power.
I thought we have an election every so often.
Yeah.
We had elections in Hoima and Karamoja the other day. I bumped into the Honorable Betty Kami, and she said, I was watching your debate and I really, really wanted to contribute into that debate to share my views about what happened in Hoima. People believe we're having these elections. What do they mean? You mean they mean nothing?
They mean nothing.
I saw a
the whole scheme of things, they mean nothing.
I saw a commission of the Electoral Commission the other day saying, what kind of president would you have if the nomination fee is only 20 million? Raise it to 100 million. What kind of member of parliament would you have at a nomination fee of 3 million? Raise that to 10 million. And I was thinking, wait a minute, Mr. Sevagala. Wait a minute. Where are you coming from? Where are we and what are you talking about? But are these just emotions?
Exactly, because Charles, look, we have an economy where our average salary, if you average how much Ugandans earn in terms of salary, it's just under 400,000. But somehow, a leader is proposing, let's have an election where the nomination fee is 100 million. All I see is change of the colonizer. They don't want...
Because he justifies that. He says, you don't need to have every Mukasabi Amujisha and Okello clamoring to be president of this country.
Of course not, but we also need to have a situation where everyone has an opportunity if they deserve it, because that's the point. If an election was free and fair, the point would be that we set up a system where anyone of us, as long as they can emerge as the best, becomes a leader. Now, what you have is, if you require 100 million, you're basically saying we have ring-fenced the presidency for the rich. And how do people in this town get rich? By either being close to political power, actually by being either politicians or having contacts with political power. And so again, colonizer has changed color, still the same arrangement. That's why if, and someone has been asking why Ugandans generally don't celebrate independence. People will think independence and say, oh, for those who have formal jobs, it's a day to rest. For others who are in downtown Kampala and other places, they just go on to hustle as usual, because this liberation has not happened. I'll go back a bit to what Yusuf was talking about, changing constitutions, for example. One of the biggest loopholes from what I know of the 1966 Constitution was detention without trial. That it provided for detention without trial. These days we don't have it in the Constitution. It was removed, but detention without trial is the norm. So have we changed much? I don't think so. If you're thinking Sironko, it was kind of interesting to watch, because as President Museveni was awarding the president of Zimbabwe, the president of DRC was also meeting with other presidents, and you could see the new breed, as they used
new configuration.
Yes, but the guys that the world over want to associate with were in DRC, and these dictators. Let me just say dictators. In Sironko celebrating giving each other awards. What did the president of Zimbabwe, how did he earn the
presidency?
No. Forget the presidency. What did he do for that medal? Just being president and attending.
Pan-Africanist.
I thought many of these medals, I don't know, there are so many that get awarded.
Yeah.
I don't know what people do to earn them.
Exactly, Charles.
Especially political leaders who come here. We have given that same medal to the president of Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah, but
yes.
Charles, exactly.
That same,
we are giving to autocrats. I am sure if you're a serious president with a good image, you might not want to take that medal, because if you're getting it alongside a man who has butchered hundreds of people in his country, do you really want that medal? Do you think it's a sign of honor? I for one don't think so. And that's the thing, that the face of the colonizer has changed. Become is slightly more crude than, it's not as crude as the guys who took over after immediately after independence, but slightly more crude than, at least for Uganda. We know that countries like South Africa and Zimbabwe experienced a harsher colonialist.
Yes, before I come to Kenneth, Victor, do you think that as Africans, as young Ugandans, we owe it ourselves to be a lot more positive about our country or our countries or about our continent than we sometimes are?
But we are positive. We still many of us still stay here and struggle and try to do whatever we can to change our situation.
Yes, many are dying on the Straits of Gibraltar.
Yes,
and,
yes.
Trying to cross the Mediterranean. Many more are dying in the Yemeni desert, trying to cross over to the Middle East and Israel.
Even some arrested in Mexico. But
yes, and men are dying. The other day they rescued 12 who were trying to cross to the airport to go and do slavery in the Middle East. And they said, I think we're sending about 40,000. In the year when there was a ban on export of labor, apparently we sent 40,000 to Qatar alone, I think, something like that.
So you think being nice about the
I'm wondering where the optimism, the hope is.
No, because the argument then would be that if we say nicer things, these people will stay. I don't think so. Some of these things need to be called out so that we figure out a way to change. And those of us who are in the business of calling things out, we call them out. Those who are in the business of doing something about it, do something about it.
Kenneth, let me come to you.
Yes, Charles.
The most interesting bit of not just this year's independence rather, Ugandans tend to forget quickly. What we saw on Wednesday rather, what we saw on Wednesday, with the police deploying at Robert Center Muchagulanyi's home in Magere and at his beach in Busabala, and his escape, has replayed itself several times. I remember many years ago, there's a young man who a supporter of the Forum for Democratic Change, who's been in detention in the Democratic Republic of Congo for the last so many years, Sam Mugumya.
Yeah.
And they're holding an alternative independence at the Freedom Square in Makerere. Fortunately, then I remember one of those independence celebrations, there was no police deployment there. But when the FDC women tried to organize an event, I think somewhere in Katwe, police deployed to try and stop it. Every time they announced they would have an alternative activity, they would get blocked. Now, Bobi Wine, emerging as one of the potential challengers for the presidency of this country, says, I am going to hold a concert to sing on Independence Day. And police says, writes to him on the eve of independence, 8th October, and says, you are not allowed to go out and sing. What does this mean? And the treatment, is FDC replacing, is people power replacing FDC in terms of how they're treated politically? What does this mean for you as part of our independence?
Well, to understand that situation much better, let me connect my explanation on institutions as key pillars of our independence. And this, in this case, I'm talking about the army and the police. One of the glaring facts about our independence, if you look at the issues of institutions, is the fact that the institutions themselves have not been able to become independent. If you talk about parliament, we still have the same situation. When you talk about the army, we still have the same situation. When you talk about all the institutions that are supposed to uphold that baby that Yusuf was talking about, still play to the whims of whoever is in charge at a particular time. And also one key other factor about our independence from the political circle is the fact that our politics have not yet been sanitized. Someone will tell you that the seeds of the hate and the confusion in our politics was actually sowed at independence, and sometimes you tend to agree with that kind of situation. And one key reality that cannot go away is the fact that throughout all these 57 years, we have not had a peaceful transfer of power from one individual to another. And the larger part of it, when we had Museveni, President Museveni, it has been handover from Museveni himself to Museveni again, which simply does not create that space for a peaceful transfer of power that that would play a very critical role in actually determining whether politically we have matured. Because
President Museveni himself has argued and said that you do not have to hand over power for handing over power's sake. That in the first, between 1962 and 1986, how many years are those, Dictor? 1960, 1986? That's about 24 years.
Yeah.
In the first 24
years,
years, you had change of power 8 times. So what?
I mean, the aspirations of the people should always be at the forefront. For instance, one of the key facts that the NRM people and President Museveni will tell you that democracy has been more exercised during their time than ever before, because we are always having regular elections. But the quality of these elections is what actually should determine whether we can have a peaceful transfer of power or not. But you and I will agree that there are times when the mood in this country is actually clear that we need to see some other person at the helm. And it is very fundamental on my side, because it would be a litmus test on whether we have actually matured or not. Because if one person is actually able to hand over from somebody who builds on the successes that they have had, then actually that is progress in terms of the country going forward. You build that confidence, you build that maturity for people to actually know that in Uganda, it's predictable that you can have somebody moving from one point to another, that those people are able to determine their course of events, or politically, or the level of democracy in that country has actually matured. But now connecting to your question about the institutions, well, it's also very absurd, because Bobby Wine will tell you that this is the 157th time that his request to hold a concert has actually been declined. You see, the police said that he wouldn't be allowed to hold the rally because they were not in a position to provide the manpower that would be needed to actually secure it. But then the manpower which was sent to his home and the manpower which was sent to Busabala to ensure that nobody actually goes to the venue was present. And this is why
bigger than what would have been required.
This is why one would clearly see that this issue was not about security, it was about the politics or at the end of it all. Because you know, one key factor around Bobby Wine, one of his political, one of his key position or key ingredient as a politician is his music. So by simply allowing him to perform, and given the fact that he was even launching another song which almost also speaks to the politics that we have in this country, there was no way they were going to allow him. But from the other side, because when they tell you we need Bobby Wine to be separated from Honorable Chagulanyi, and then Bobby Wine says, I want to do a music concert, and then you're denying him an opportunity, that's where the problem actually happens. Okay. I think like one government person said just this week that I saw an article in a newspaper, I don't remember exactly which newspaper, and actually that person said the mistakes of the NRM are actually making Bobby Wine a political big shot in the country, because the mistakes they keep on making make him to become even more relevant, both locally and especially in the eyes of the international world.
Okay, just before I take a break, I want to come to you, Yusuf, briefly. On surprised that we're having an independence celebration, we're debating opposition to President Museveni. Some people have told me that classifying contenders for political power, especially in this country, between opposition and who, is problematic. You are the academic, you help us maybe study that. Does it have any negative value to identify a particular group or particular individuals as opposition? Someone is being advised that we do this after the break. But surprised that Kizza Besigye is not a major discussion at this stage, or there are no other major figures in the political position that we're discussing on this independence as we move towards an election. Let's take a commercial break. You'll answer after the break. You're still watching The Fourth Estate, and we're taking stock of Uganda at 57 with my colleagues in the studio, Yusuf Serunkuma, Dictor Simwe, and Kenneth Anderson Lukwago. Yusuf, I just put a question to you before you took the break.
Yeah.
Surprised that we're having an independence discussion today and an independence celebration where the Kikavuyo maker of old, Kizza Besigye, is not being discussed, and we're discussing Bobi Wine.
No, I'm not surprised.
Why?
I think Bobi Wine is not, rather, Besigye is not necessarily missing, because what we're seeing from Bobi Wine is continuity, and whoever wants to appreciate the infrastructure that Bobi Wine thrives on has to appreciate Kizza Besigye's contribution. That may be Kizza Besigye has run out of steam. You may say that. Maybe the general community is fatigued of seeing Kizza Besigye at the helm of this. Bobi Wine is continuity of Kizza Besigye's campaign. Kizza Besigye appreciates that the only way we can take Museveni's government on is through structureless, peasant, or urban protest. The elections don't matter. As long as you have the president on the ballot, forget about taking the presidency through an election. Even if you actually won it, it won't guarantee you power. So Kizza Besigye appreciates that, and Museveni himself appreciates that. This is why he's able to keep everybody into this sort of electioneering. I argued one time that it won't surprise me if President Museveni called the opposition to State House and asked them to organize in front of a single candidate. Because when they organize, it's easy to defeat them. But Bobi Wine and Besigye appreciates this moment so well, that we live in a time where the best way we have a fire burning this side, the best way you can put out that fire, for you from the category, I'm sure you know this, you have to light another fire this way. If the president runs this country through unorganized, structureless ways, the only way you can challenge him is through unorganized, structureless ways sometimes. Because if Museveni were to be organized from within the NRM, for example, as a party, it would be himself not to stand for political office. All right? But now that he's standing, he manipulates the system. You have to find a way of working legally, but from unorganized structures. So what we are seeing from Bobi Wine now is that continuity of what Besigye started, the Defiance campaign, the Walk to Work. If these were the campaigns that were championed by Besigye as their figurehead, right now we're seeing Bobi Wine trying to do a continuity of this. Okay. Seeing him jump onto a bike in downtown Kampala was really fascinating, and I remember tweeting that this is the stuff that he's made for. He should be doing more of this. The more he started wearing suits and having structures, spokesperson, secretary general representatives, attending
coordinators,
conferences in air-conditioned offices, almost people died that day. He didn't die. Bobi Wine has to do more of what he did when he jumped onto a bike down in Kampala. That is the only way people can be seen to be thriving. And I think in that we see continuities.
Victor, what does this say about organization through political party structures? Because the retreat of Besigye shouldn't mean the retreat of the Forum for Democratic Change. For the last so many years, FDC organized alternative independence celebrations. This year they did not.
They did.
They did?
They did.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
I thought
it was lucky though, but
I thought I saw the Secretary General of the party attending the national celebrations.
Yes, and that's where I feel slightly uncomfortable. I agree mostly with Yusuf on the point that Bobi Wine coming up and acting the way he is doing is sort of continuity of what Kizza Besigye started. But the problem comes when then FDC has some of its topmost members attending NRM celebrations for Nandala Mafabi because that was in his constituency. But the consideration that then Nandala Mafabi would decide to attend is interesting in itself because, like Namboze has said, that's how many of the good DP people started. You attend a celebration here and another one there, and the next thing we know, you what the president terms as good DP.
Good opposition.
Yeah, good opposition. So it's almost sad, but you sort of also understand FDC. This has been a fight that has been going on for a very long time. It gets exhausting, and the only way the more Bobby Wines can keep coming up is if the population decides to join. What the population now does is to stand on balconies if they have access to balconies or whatever and cheer.
They do. We saw a lot of them downtown when Bobby Wine was riding through.
Yes,
on the
so they cheer.
So
they don't participate, but they cheer, with the exception of a few young border men, because when Bobby Wine they were trying to arrest Bobby Wine, I was around Kamosha, and a whole some of them came driving crazy, and trying to provide support, the necessary support. And so, with the exception of some of those young men, the population feels like they need a savior to come and save them. They are unhappy, but they are not willing. So we cheer on social media. Estella Nyanzi stays in jail forever. We are cheering. We have hashtags. She's even part of our Twitter accounts, but all we do is like just we are thinking about you. We do not do anything else beyond that. So that's what we've been doing.
Has significantly retreated to a few people. You'd find a few very close friends who have like this Nana Kaga, who has stood with Stella Nyanzi throughout, has suffered her own share, and then the women activist movement. A few of them. You actually can't find majority of the women activists. Even when the Stella Nyanzi case shouldn't be an issue, or Stella Nyanzi, a Bobby Wine, a Kiza Besigye, shouldn't be an issue of just those individuals. It should be broader in appeal, but you have left even this to a few people, and you're looking out, which women activists are here? Why are they not talking about this? Why is it not an important issue? Now, we may not even know when Stella Nyanzi comes to court or doesn't come to court, because we seem as a country to have moved on. Yeah.
So for me, that's the problem, that it's very hard for a Bobby Wine or someone else to come after Bobby Wine, because what's for sure is that the state has figured out a way to exhaust these guys. When Bobby Wine is exhausted, who will come next? That's the question. And will they come, or they will feel like this is futile? Okay. Should someone be planning another way to counter this other than doing it just on the streets like they are doing? Are there other ways that the state can, the NRM government, I shouldn't say the state, the NRM government can be countered, but without just depending on a Bobby Wine looking good, and like Yusuf says, he really looks very fit when he's doing some of the things.
He looks like he's in his element.
So that's important. I think that's something that the opposition or people who are opposed to the NRM government need to think about. What other ways can we counter this system?
Kenneth, yes, I know you have a thought to share, but let me just add this before you, so that you can add what you wanted to say. You have a kind of retreat for the FDC, which has been, since it came onto the front, the forerunner for political activism. Previously, you had the Uganda Young Democrats. You can hardly find them now. They are there, yes, they're organizing, but where are they? Of course, UPC, we hardly talk about UPC these days. It once had a vibrant youth wing that was making things happen, or voices that you would have had come out on independence. Now, who are we having? We had, I think, some comments from Frank Gashumba, a few other people, but you don't feel that there is, formally or informally, that other alternative political voices have space, are organizing, and can make themselves felt outside of that organized by the government in power.
Charles, from the perspective of the 57 years of independence, I think we are simply discussing symptoms. I think the biggest discussion this country needs to have is actually on how a new consensus about our governance can actually be discussed. Because all these guys we are talking about Bobby Wine, Kiza Besigye, FDC, the disappearance of UID, and all those guys. They are simply part of a bigger problem that we have in this country. You see, politics has been bastardized, you know, and there is this semblance of trying to make it a privilege of a few. A few minutes ago, you were just talking about a member of the Electoral Commission who is talking about increasing the nomination fees, when actually there is a demand that the nomination fees should be lowered much further. That tries to show you that there is a certain class of people in this country who actually think governance or leadership in this country should be a preserve of only them. And at this point, I think we need to realize that this country belongs to all of us, and we need to build a consensus on how actually we can address the bigger issues around the governance of our country. For instance, the reason Bobi Wine cannot have a concert is because the people in power today actually think he's a threat. While the Constitution grants him the rights to mobilize, he cannot do that. The same reason why we are saying Besigye is nowhere is because he has been clobbered and mistreated because of the system that is around today. He can no longer have that space to actually get out and exercise. Yet the Constitution presupposes that as Ugandans, we are all free to aspire as long as we meet the qualities of actually providing leadership in this country. So I think we need to find a way. And I actually thought the national dialogue process, if it had been actually built and embraced by all, it would have actually provide us a new level in terms of our governance. Because sometimes when I sit down in my house, I actually think about what would happen if suddenly Museveni left the scene. We know what will happen, for instance, in the NRM. We know factions would emerge. I have had a discussion with some few people within government that I may not quote, and they actually say the most relevant thing that would happen would be the army to grab power. The army would simply take over and will be simply going back. So we actually need to have a discussion as a country from the perspective of independence, whether our politics is actually growing and providing the opportunity to would-be good leaders who are out there, who are fearing to actually get on the political scene because they know they will be mistreated and done all sort of things.
For the would-be good leaders, you wouldn't be able to hold power for 34 years.
But in then, that should be the essence of leadership.
Look at it this way, Kenneth. We became independent in 1962. Between 1962 to 1986, we'd run through 8 presidents. And each one of them was pushing the other out of power. Okay?
That is
so
correct.
Where you're talking about opportunity, the first 24 years.
But the question is,
the period that is
are we not likely to go back to that very circle because of the lack of continuity that we are not providing on the political
side? But we are already there.
Just a moment, let me make my argument here. Okay. What you see today, if you see the narrative that the incumbent regime structures or sells, is that Uganda's second liberation, second independence actually, the real independence, starts in 1986. And that's where you begin counting all these other good things. We'll talk about them in a moment. But that's where you begin counting them. But you're able to count those and reel them off because of long stay or continuity. Other people call it long stay, other people call it continuity. No change. I don't know what you'd call it. But where is the room for that in this our politics? And I want you gentlemen and lady to broaden this discussion a little bit.
This is where this is where the room is. I'm looking at the generation that is currently leading us, the crop of leaders that we have, the people who basically came with President Museveni from the bush.
But there are not many left.
There are not so many left. And I have argued before that the onus is on us, the new generation, to actually try to avoid the nature of politics they have played.
You're still in the new generation? Are you still in that new generation?
Yes, I actually believe I'm still in the new generation.
Because you've run through so many generations.
I'm not in the
without opportunity.
I'm not in the generation I'm not in the generation of Museveni and his group.
Yes.
And all the other politicians who are probably on the scene. I'm thinking we as the new generation, for instance, if I use the example of we guys who are here on the table, we have a very big role to play. But at the most unfortunate thing is that the nature of politics actually denies us the opportunity to actually provide the leadership. For instance, if you're going to be a leader in this country, if you want to go and run in an election, if you do not have a minimum of at least 300 million shillings to run in a political campaign, you will not do it.
Actually, as stated, you need $1 billion shillings
exactly
to run and win an election.
So what kind of politics are we playing? Is that nature of politics not actually kicking out majority of Ugandans
is
who would actually provide that opportunity?
I can see
to lead
Dictor
this
is
country?
smiling. And Dictor, are we being naive discussing this way? Because look at
that's
it.
what I wanted to say.
You lose.
Kenneth comes off as naive.
Let's not be naive. Both of you, all of you here on the table will agree with me that that is the ideal situation. We should have these days countries are being run like a business. And that's why some of those countries are actually moving forward.
Let's broaden this debate, gentlemen, a little bit.
That is the ideal situation. But of course, in the Ugandan context, I would agree with you when you say I'm being naive.
Okay.
That's not what.
Let's broaden this discussion a little bit. Ahmed Abiy, the president of Ethiopia, is 43 years old.
True.
He's just won the Nobel Peace Prize. He took power less than 2 years ago.
Yeah.
New kind of politics.
Exactly. 2017.
When, he came in 2017. You talked about, you referred to Professor Timothy Wangusa's poem, The New Brood of African Leaders. His was the new brood, coming out of
1990.
It was this former Secretary of State who created the new breed of African leaders.
Yeah.
Madeline.
Albright.
Albright.
Albright or Condoleezza Rice?
No. Madeline Albright, I think, yes.
Okay.
Yes, the new breed of African leaders.
Yeah.
That was the generation of President Museveni, President Isaias Afwerki, President Meles Zenawi, President Paul Kagame.
Yeah. And Mandela just entered office 1994.
No, I don't think Mandela was part of that new breed because he was much older in age.
And Kagame.
It was Kagame, Museveni, Meles Zenawi, Isaias Afwerki, and I don't remember if it was Kabila or someone. No, it wasn't Kabila. It was someone else. Madeline Albright. Now that narrative changed a long time ago. So we could be excited by the Ethiopian Prime Minister's new Nobel success.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, but I put a question and said, what happens along the way? It's not just Uganda. It's across the African continent.
Yes.
What goes wrong?
Yeah. Charles,
Yes.
You put a question to Kenneth earlier about the disappearance of the UID. That in this moment of independence, we used to have these groups come up so powerfully and say something in the context of the independence. And I wanted to say this. We've gone into something you might call a pause, right? Marx talks about a pause. When the laborers are continuing to struggle, they enter some period of a pause. Capital enters some sort of a pause to return and revisit itself, re-strategize, rethink their processes, maybe buy equipment, maybe find more funds. All right, so that's the period of a pause. But I'm seeing in our politics nowadays, especially oppositional politics, we've gone into some sort of a pause. And I think what will take out President Museveni out of office is unknown to both President Museveni and the opposition. Because if President Museveni knew it, he knows how to deal with it.
A pause is deliberate, Yusuf.
It's not deliberate.
It's not accidental.
It's processor in the sense that you reach a period where you need to sit back and relax and watch and re-strategize. The thing that we've entered into, that what you see as a moment of dullness, a moment of inactivity, I want to think about it as a pause, that we've gone into this pause so that opposition players re-strategize. Because right now, I think if you come out in the public domain as a critic or as an opponent of the sitting government, you're easily dealt with, all right? And I think the moment Bobi Wine became more public as an activist, the more the state is finding ways of dealing with him. Now, I think the opposers, the more serious case who are trying to fight this government, may be very unknown for now. And they might want to keep so, because the moment you come out, it's easy to be... So what looks like a period of inactivity, I think so much was going on. There's re-strategizing, rethinking, buying equipment,
let me tell you, there is a school of thought out there who actually think that the real politics, the real opportunity to govern Uganda or to provide their talents on the political scene is when President Yoweri Museveni has left. Maybe Yusuf is talking about that particular group.
No, I'm talking about serious people who are like really thinking about how do we confront, because like I said, and you know, you just said the same thing, that raising, for example, the nomination fee to 100 million is locking out so many people. Dicta made a fantastic point when she said that if a public servant is earning $1 million Uganda shillings and you raise the nomination fee to 100 million, that's systematically locking them out. And by the locking of potential politicians out of politics happened in 2005 when we had the Parliamentary Amendment Act, where we passed a regulation that to stand for political office, a public servant, you have to resign 3 months earlier. All right? So, you know, that systematically locked out so many people. And right now what we're seeing is the aftermath of
even going into the 2016 election,
so
there was a jump.
100 million locks out more people.
Even going into the 2016 election, you had a jump of nomination fees for members of parliament from 200,000 to 3 million, and that locked out a lot of people. Yeah. But
Charles, I wanted to answer a question you asked on the continent and what went wrong.
Yes.
I think what happens is that when you have a lot of bad leaders surviving and staying in power, then they create a multiplier effect. The African Union, when they were passing Agenda 64, they promised that by 2020, this continent would be peaceful, the politics would be clean, and so on and so forth. We are
who were guys in that Agenda 64 meeting room?
I know. And that's the point, that if you have M7 changing constitutions over and over again and staying in power, it's not then surprising that Kagame does the same, Nkurunziza does the same. If you have an Obasanjo in Nigeria failing to change the constitution to keep power, you see that West Africa is moving differently because they would be leaders are going a certain way. So, and that's the problem, that Africa has failed, or at least those who are in charge of institutions have failed to make sure that what West Africa is not great.
Why is that a disease that runs across the African continent?
Yeah, but that's the thing. There are pockets of the African continent where it's not a disease.
If you look
Southern Africa is not so bad.
Why are we not seeing it in Tanzania, for instance?
But does it matter? If you look at the Human Development Index, Tanzania is not far from where Uganda is. They've not had the issues that Uganda has had. Rwanda, Burundi, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, all these countries, put them together, they look almost exactly the same.
But
explains that?
But Charles, so here's the thing, that, yeah, I agree on the Human Development Index, but you also have to ask yourself, which country has the odds of taking up of, if like, let's say if you take Tanzania and Uganda, which country is better equipped to take off? Tanzania is better off. That's if Magufuli doesn't change the constitution, because he has the tendencies. But if they keep going, at some point, I mean, and I was having a conversation with someone today morning, and they were talking about Ghana. Ghana, for example, has had its problems. But you feel like they are, yeah, they stumble, but they are much better than most of us.
Okay, we need to move on.
Charles,
just hold it a moment. Moses here captures, Moses Talemwa, the producer, he captures it in a very interesting way. He says, this week also saw a few developments to bring warmth to the heart, including gold medal wins for Halima Nakai and Joshua Cheptegei at the International Amateur Athletics Federation World Championships in Doha, Qatar, as well as an expansion of Uganda Airlines fleet, 2 more aircraft, 2 more Bombardiers CRJ 900. 5 Ugandans were also involved in the setting pace as pace setters for Eliud Kipchoge, the Kenyan who has broken his own record. I am amazed by what he's been able to win because of this, which was almost designed like his own race.
Yeah, it was his own race.
His own marathon to break this record.
It was his own
on the way to becoming the first human to complete a marathon race in less than 2 hours in Vienna, Austria.
Was that a marathon race? If he was the one racing alone?
So you have Timothy Torotich, Jacob Kiplimo, Ronald Musagala, Thomas Ayeko, and Abdallah Mande. I was talking about hope, positive things about this country. Yeah. This looks like a package of hopeful, optimistic, good things about this country. Of course, the NRM government will tell you, will showcase the Nile Bridge, the new bridge at the Nile. They will showcase the new power dams. They will showcase the new road network that runs across the country, that you're moving on tarmac from one corner to the other corner. As they will showcase UPE and USE, they will showcase the new specialized hospital at Molago, and a few other things, and say, we have made progress.
Yeah, you know, Charles.
Yes. You have a minute each, by the way, because we need to take a break in about 3.
I want to return to Idi Amin's presidency, the 8 years of Idi Amin. And I'll say this again. After this dust has settled, after this nonsense of rating Uganda has settled, I can tell you this country will build a monument for Idi Amin somewhere either in the front of Parliament or at City Square. There will be a monument for Idi Amin. Because when you look back, we're celebrating...
there's actually a plan to build
a monument,
a center or some sort of, but from the other side of what is called dark tourism.
So with
Dark tourism was launched sometime back.
That's a terrible term to use, by the way. With due respect to the achievements that we got, the things that give warmth to our heart, when you look back in the only 8 years, right, we had John Akibua take the world. And to this day, we still live in his moment. We celebrate when you look at people who are broken records. John Akibua, in the time of the Idi Amin presidency, you still return to it. If you're talking about how many bombardiers do we have now? 4, right?
Yes. During the Idi Amin time, we also had boxers.
We had 8. And you're running direct flights from Entebbe to London. All right?
We had a larger fleet than that, actually.
So we had so if you look at these moments, 8 years on one hand, which are really maligned so much in the current political discourse, and on the other hand, you have 34. All right. When you talk about the specialized hospital that we're planning to build, by the way, most of it has been eaten already. Favoring the first.
Of course. What did you expect?
And then Mulago Hospital under Idi Amin was extremely functional. That you have surgeries, highly sophisticated surgeries carried out in Mulago Hospital. Now you can't even think about a single surgery. That if you have the Speaker of Parliament being treated for fatigue, he has to be taken to Nairobi. And we're celebrating this moment. You're going to look at these two periods in our history, 8 years on the one hand and 34 on the other. Well, maybe 34 and counting on the other. And there's a great, outstanding mismatch that we need to think about.
You know, Charles, Yusuf raised the issue of Akibua, and it's interesting because yesterday someone was talking about
John even the boxer.
Even today, if John Akibua, the time he ran, up to today, it can still win Uganda a medal. 72, and now it's how many years later? And his time, the time he took to win that medal, he would still be on the medal list in Doha with that time.
And
so
we also reached the African Cup finals.
So that's
we reached the African Cup finals.
Finals. Yes.
We have not gone any close. We have just been qualifying for the finals.
And it's kind of sad that because while Yusuf is of the view that some of Idi Amin's sins are imagined, some of them were real, and that's something that we have to always remember. And it's very sad that so many years later, the NRM with 30-something years under their belt, they still, what we call our feel-good moments, still, Amin competes effortlessly with these feel-good moments. But I also
if you've had the talk about the return to the air of Uganda Airlines and comparing the fleets now, what we're celebrating today, people say those achievements dwarf what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I also wanted to answer. I remember when you asked whether as young Ugandans we were doing anything good for the country. Halima Nakai, Ronald Masaga, all these guys are fighting on their own. These girls, Halima Nakai and Winnie Nanyonda, I think that's her name. They had to walk long distances to be able to reach Nambole and run and practice. These are results of individuals hustling to get where they are. So if you're looking for signs of Ugandans, whether you're talking about, let's say, the generation of the 80s, what people call millennials, or people who are slightly older or slightly younger, the one of 96 and younger, Generation Z, these guys are actually doing whatever they can to make Uganda better.
I'm afraid we need to take a break. Kenneth, hold your thought. I'll provide opportunity when we come out of the break. But just what you're saying is, I was arguing with Moses last week. Who knew Halima Nakai before she burst to the front of the race in Doha? I said, no, we knew her, but knew her how and knew her for what? We celebrate, these days, we celebrate after success. Exactly. We do not prepare for success. And people have been talking about that high altitude training center and how far it has gone. And the other day there was a story being done, I think, on NTV the road to access that is very difficult, so people can't even use it?
No, people are now building. I think Kipsuro is the one building his own,
Okay.
own ground.
Let's take a quick commercial break. When we come out, we'll be continuing to discuss sports. We'll pick it up from Halima Nakai and Joshua Cheptegei and Eliud Kipchoge to discuss the new crisis at the Federation of Uganda Football Association. The president, Magogo Moses, has been suspended. There are calls for him to be investigated. And apparently for what? He sold tickets for the World Cup.
On the black market.
On the black market. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this last segment of the Fourth Estate, and we'll end this discussion on a rather uncomfortable note, because you can't be celebrating 2 gold medals and a large number of Ugandans making the pace setters for Eliud Kipchoge, and then you end up discussing how the moment we managed to return to the World Cup finals, our president for Africa Cup of Nations rather. We returned the Africa Cup of Nations. We've gone there twice now, and our president is being suspended for apparently selling FIFA World Cup tickets, Ugandans. Now, from what we hear is that, for people who may not understand where we're coming from, earlier this week, FIFA President Moses Magogo was slapped with a 2-month suspension after the chairman of the adjudicatory chamber of the Independent Ethics Committee at FIFA ratified the plea bargain he entered into. When you enter a plea bargain, is that you admit some fault and negotiate.
You admit fault.
Yeah, you admit. You admit fault and negotiate. You mitigate the sentence.
You plead guilty.
Yes, you mitigate the sentence. And now an investigation to Magogo was opened on 23rd July 2018 related to the release of 2014 FIFA World Cup tickets. The tickets, 177 of them, were sold on the black market, apparently by Magogo, which means now he's not taking part of, he's not taking part in activities, at least official activities. He initially said he was stepping aside to allow a flawless investigation where he wouldn't interfere with it. But what is coming out reveals that the investigation actually had been carried out, a decision made, and him admitting fault. What happened to this country? I want to start with you. Go ahead. Someone will take care of the phone.
That's where the exact problem is. The moment he creates that impression that he was stepping aside so that an investigation would go on, when actually the investigations had been concluded and verdict entered. That's exactly where the problem is. But you see, the FIFA issues are a bigger problem of the governance situation we have in this country. If you want to understand very well the management of football in this country, it's almost like the usual politics that we see here. You look at the process through which people get to be elected leaders in FIFA, and you actually see that there is a big problem, because management of football in many countries that are doing very well has actually progressed from the level of merely having elections to actually determining who will lead a football association on merit, and most likely it is treated as a business, because football is now largely a business, not only an entertainment sport. Now, the situation in Uganda is actually very funny now, and it begs so many questions. If Mr. Magogo was actually able to sell 177 tickets on a black market, and we know money has been flowing in from the time he became FIFA president, not basically maybe because of the leadership he provides, but because there has been a goodwill and the debates around Uganda having the capacity to perform in sports, but because of poor funding, certain things were not happening. And one would wonder, if the man was able actually to sell the tickets, is it not possible that he has actually been picking from some of this money that comes in forms of sponsorship, that comes in terms of contributions that are being made by the government? We had the other mishap in Egypt the other time when the Cranes players went on strike because they actually thought what was due to them was not being provided, and we actually learned later that actually government had actually provided the money, but the money was taking ages to arrive on the accounts of the players. So there's so many things, and for me,
no, they had given the players some 1,000, some little money,
and they were withholding the other amount of money.
Were withholding the other money.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Victor knows the story
that's exactly
better.
the problem. Then before that, you had a debate about how Uganda was losing to Tanzania the other day, and people were talking about match fixing. Match fixing is where you probably you expect you are paid from the other side to actually
throw the game.
To throw the game. You had issues about him abandoning the players in the camp in Egypt to attend a housewarming party in Kampala here. So there's just so many things, and it's a continuation of the problems, the lack of transparency that we have in management of state affairs. And to me, I think Magogo has put us in a situation that really begs. And I don't know why FIFA even had to suspend him for only 2 months. They would have just said that he's not fit enough to continue leading the football fraternity in Uganda, because now, after you have pleaded guilty that you actually did this, and you still remain the person who represents the country to the meetings being held by FIFA, I wonder how even other delegates will look at him.
Victor, interesting one. Magogo has been credited for taking the Uganda Cranes to the Africa Cup of Nations finals twice, but now he's indicted actually. This plea bargaining comes with an indictment where he will be made to pay, or he's going to pay $10,000. That's about 36.5.
36 million.
Yeah, 36 point.
Yeah, because it was, I
million.
think, Swiss
francs.
Swiss francs, which
Okay.
is again 36 million
in a fine. But the tickets, each one of them, was costing about $1,000. That's about 3,650,000 on average. So if you're talking of close to 177, about 177 tickets, it means people are calculating he might have made about $200,000. So this is, and the 2 months that Kenneth is talking about, it is a slap on the wrist.
Yes. And that's the problem. I think FIFA is also very corrupt. And I think governments should reach a point where they should be able to appeal some of these things. If I was Janet Museveni, who is the Minister of Education and Sports, I'd try my best
Speak to her. I believe she's either watching the show or someone will give her a brief of the show.
Yeah, I'd try and do something about Magogo just taking a 2 months leave because it's nothing else. And then he goes back. He's so here are his credentials at the moment, or before he's a member of that committee. Actually, they say chairperson of that committee that investigated him. He's also a member of the Confederation of African Football Executive Committee. So and of course president of FIFA. Now, a guy like that should not be in charge of our football. He should not be representing Uganda. He has no business being anywhere near our football. And
you know, Victor, the saddest thing is that you're saying the government should interfere. The way management of football is configured, once the government interferes, FIFA
that governments are not supposed to interfere. But governments can appeal. This slap on the wrist is not acceptable. The government should go and appeal to this thing, and if necessary, just like the United States has indicted FIFA executives, have this guy thrown in a jail somewhere so that we can, because here's the thing, we might have lost to Senegal because of the things Magogo did. And I am waiting for the likes of Odonga Oto to apologize to the players, because we now know that this guy is corrupt, and it's most likely that what the players said at the time was true, while Odonga Oto was saying this, and all these other Ugandans, you know, these players are not patriotic and so on and so forth. Someone else is making money off their back.
Victor, if I may just give you some information.
Yes.
If I may just give you some information. Now, this very week, the CID in Chivoli actually summoned Sewanyana, who actually took the matter to FIFA, and it's not clear whether they want to charge him as an individual, or they wanted him to provide more information that would result into prosecuting Magogo locally. So
I don't think that's the way to go.
It's a process that we should also watch carefully to see the intentions of the police.
I don't think that's the way to go, because the one thing we don't want, the Ugandan football has struggled a lot. The one thing we don't want is to then get ourselves banned. But if we can put a spotlight on FIFA, given the problems that FIFA is already facing, one hopes that this punishment can be extended. This guy should be at the very least banned from our football.
But you're talking about, hold it, Yusuf, you're talking about again.
Apart from FIFA, can Magogo be prosecuted here?
No,
locally?
because if that happens, most likely Ugandan football will be banned.
Well, I am not sure about that, because criminal prosecution, there is a lead here.
FIFA has provided us with the evidence.
Someone has provided a smoking gun. That's some criminality. The president of FIFA was engaged in some criminal or fraudulent activity.
Yeah.
Investigation of fraud should be within the ambit of our agencies here, the police ID. But Yusuf, there's a kind of being locked between a rock and a hard place. This is the guy who's taken the Uganda cranes to a level it had not gone to in a very long time. 38 years without reaching anywhere near the Africa Cup of Nations finals. We don't go there once, we go there twice. Yes, we performed miserably, partly because of this problem, because the players went on strike in Egypt the other day, and you can imagine what kind of disruption that is, because FIFA people here did not anticipate that the Uganda cranes would go beyond the first round. So they calculated, provided allowances, wanted to play about with the money that they had been provided by the government, thinking that, by the way, you won't get NFR, so we'll have come back, and they didn't pay for the full time they're going to be there. And you caught between a rock and a hard place. He's a guy who's brought some success to the Uganda cranes.
It pains me to accord him all the credit that you're trying to accord him. I think we need to create the time, first of all, across the region, East Africa. Most of the East African countries who had not been participating in the African Cup finals had a chance to participate in the previous two encounters. So that's not really a Ugandan thing, it's a regional thing.
And partly it's because of the reforms which were carried out about qualifications, where they even introduced the best loser can still go and qualify.
We need to
so there were some changes.
He's a beneficiary of the moment. It's not necessarily his credit to take. You need to look around and see that not Uganda alone has been lucky to go there. And it's not, if you watch Ugandan football, I mean, we're not exceptionally good that we really merit being in that tournament. No, I used to play football, I've watched football. I don't think we're really exceptionally good. You need to create the time, but that's a very subjective point for me. The larger point I want to make.
Subjective, and I think a bit unfair to those players who are putting us some good football on their own.
We can talk about that. I mean, look at elsewhere. Our players professionally are not in any of the big leagues, right? Across Europe and North America. They're not big. Like if they're really exceptionally gifted, they would maybe be. But that's a different argument. It's diversion from this one. I want to say this: impunity cultures. All right, there's a moment where impunity becomes a culture in the life of a country. That the ways in which things are negotiated are within the terrain of impunity. You can do anything and get away with it. What the Magogo case shows us is that crimes that have an international connection will be exposed. All right, and I can tell you, Magogo locally has gotten away with so much. I was lucky to speak to the Observer journalist, sports journalist, Vianney Simbe the other day, and he said to me, Magogo gets away with so much. Even at the time when Mlindo was in charge at the helm of FUFA, it was actually Magogo running the show. Can you imagine that Magogo takes $60,000 every year from the StarTimes contract, and the clubs playing football get 60 million Uganda shillings? He gets like 6 times
What
the
the clubs
amount
are taking.
that the clubs are taking. That's obnoxious. We shouldn't be worried about that because they're local crimes, right? We don't get them exposed.
I'll tell you something, Yusuf,
Yeah.
we're talking about that. Going into the 2016 elections, I was involved with SEDU at the time, and we're trying to, as much as possible, put the word out on Ugandans preparing and participating in that election. And one of the moments we wanted to seize was to get those electoral messages to Nambole Stadium, where the Uganda Cranes was playing. And I sent out word through an emissary and said, what can we do to associate with the Uganda Cranes and put our messages out there? I also reached out to the Uganda police, the traffic police, and they were willing to take. The only difference was that the traffic police asked for more vests, reflector vests to wear than we could afford to put. So we ended up not putting out any. And of course, trying to make sure that you don't get misunderstood. But the Uganda Cranes is one place, one team that rallies the entire country. Nambole Stadium gets a light regardless of political affiliation, regardless of anything. Why we didn't go ahead with the Uganda police was we feared if someone wearing a SEDU jacket on votability is seen clobbering somebody, how do you get out of it? But with the FUFA and the Uganda Cranes, we thought you'd have a negotiation and then send a message, one or the other. Either through a banner going up in Nambole or getting the Uganda Cranes to talk about it or getting them to wear something that sells a message about participating in the elections of 2016. And one came back to me unofficially that, you know, before you begin discussing, you need to put a certain amount of money on the table so that you can begin a discussion. I said, we're talking about making this country better, all of us. Okay. So what happens? Whether it came from him directly or whether the money would go into the system, I do not know. But that I was told, how much do you have? What can it do? I mean, to be able to begin a discussion. I said, okay, that discussion ends there.
Yeah. Charles, you see, and that's the thing. And you are talking about Uganda qualifying. You remember that we would have qualified earlier than we did, but we had a game where most people said it was thrown. Equatorial Guinea, I believe, and that game there was a feeling it was thrown. We had a game earlier, the incident with Obua. Where Obua was benched for speaking out because there was corruption related to players' money. They would bring the president would meet the players, would give them money, and then the money would never get to the players.
Yes, and then the president was going back to meet them and Obua was removed from the lineup.
Because Obua came out and spoke up, and then because he was removed from the lineup, we drew with Kenya and never made, because we needed a win, but we drew and we never made it to the Cup of Nations. So some of these things, the corruption has been all over. So we are helped right now because the money that is in sports in general is that individuals working on their own, sacrificing on their own, brings good, decent players that can win us things, and then all you need is a coach that you can put in place. But this has been systemic. At FUFA, it's been corruption all the way. And I think there is a way that the government, at the same way they call the president meets players after they've played, is the same way they should interrupt and put this to the end. Because they can't be on the one hand going to the national prayer breakfast and preaching no corruption, and then corruption stares you in the face, someone who has admitted guilt, and you don't even hear a word from the Minister of Sports. You know, what's that?
You know, the theme of the National Prayer Breakfast was on character, and very beautiful messages in the National Prayer Breakfast book, and the organization and the messages that were being shared. But that's a discussion for another day. Yusuf, conclude your thought.
Charles, the point I was trying to make is that you need to understand Moses Magogo in the larger body of things, the ways in which impunity has cultured in this country, that corruption is like one of those pastime things. We look at our headlines every morning, so much money stolen, and we just walk past those headlines like it doesn't matter at all. All right? So many of similar crimes are reported under FUFA, but they're like the larger manifestations of corruption that happen in other places. So Magogo is a symptom of our crisis as a community. And if we are to reform, you have to start by the ministry under which FUFA belongs. There's a National Council for Sports. You know, at time we had this big debate over leasing Lugogo Cricket Oval to selling it, whereas giving it to a prayer meeting instead of a game happening. Nambole, you have a debate between Nambole and like all these places
where we now have a shopping mall.
So the difference with this case and why it has become like a thing of public concern is because there's international connection. Our cases of corruption become big time when there's a connection with international players. So this is why we have this convention now. But to reform, and I can tell you even now, because the Constitution of FIFA doesn't allow, if you're convicted, the Constitution doesn't allow you to stand for political office, right? But I can tell you, we wait to see what will happen after the 2 months of suspension, whether he will simply resume office, which is quite likely that he will return to his office after.
Alan Sewanyana is asking for a broader investigation in Parliament. He says there should be a broader investigation, and Kenneth is telling us
the police
he has gone to the police. I don't know if
he was summoned to the police.
That's the thing I wanted to tell Yusuf, that it's not necessarily true that the international connection was. I think to some extent, Alan being a member of Parliament helped push FIFA, where it did, because FIFA is almost as corrupt as FUFA. Football is generally corrupt, and that's a big problem that I think countries should be figuring out a way to deal with. I think it helped that Alan is a member of Parliament, because politicians, whatever their other weaknesses, can push some of these things, and that's the one thing that I think we should thank Alan for, using his position to at least get some, I don't know whether to call it justice, but at least show light to what's going on in FUFA.
Charles, without disagreeing with that Dictor said, which I agree with, I think the difference with this crime is that it was convicted against an international person. The guy, the American that, because you know that what happened, that the tickets were not actually sold to the guy. Magogo had a double crime, right? The guy who was supposed to buy the tickets, Magogo received the money, but didn't send all the tickets. He then sold them to another South African. That's where the original black market dealer got concerned. So it was a double crime.
It's an international. Is it an international syndicate of selling tickets? Because you remember when there was a shake-up of FIFA before, there was that panorama investigation by the BBC that exposed corruption at FIFA, including the former vice president from one of those Caribbean countries. Yes. And then the former FIFA president, who was forced to retire, Sepp Blatter, and the whole of that cabal of team that was running FIFA.
And it came up to Africa.
But look, the black market is a different network, right? So there's corruption in FIFA itself, but that's a different network. So the black market is a different network.
For whom were these 177 tickets?
They were for Ugandans.
How do Ugandans get this?
No, because you see, you know, the cost was much lower. At $90, you could buy this ticket, because Uganda is a least developed country. We know we don't have that many rich people.
What you're saying is that
the tickets are given on a quota system. Each country is allocated. So, once that happens, the tickets are off the market. So once they go onto a black market, they fetch a higher price. So I think this is basically what happened in this case.
Charles,
gentlemen and lady, please help me understand, and I believe many of our viewers. I am not so much into sports, so please indulge me for that. So every country, a member of FIFA, receives a particular number of tickets. And those tickets, are the Ugandan ones subsidized?
Yes.
If they are subsidized, how does a Charles Mwangusha?
They are supposed to be put on the market.
They are supposed to be put on the market and sold by the federation.
The same way you know about tickets to Nambole to go watch a game.
And so, Magogo picks the quota for Uganda,
which is $90,
which is supposed to be sold at $90.
Yeah, versus the others that were 400 and something and above, because that was the price of a ticket.
The allocation is done. The official tickets get exhausted. Now you revert to buying.
No. You see, you also have to remember that these other tickets are much cheaper. So, for example, if the cheapest ticket is $440,
US dollars.
you have this one of $90. You can move it from 90 to 300 to even 400. And the person who buys it will still have bought it at a lower rate than, and of course that's
our producer is whispering to me through this thing here, telling me these tickets, the value is $1,000. Or $1,000.
Because
no, but is the value of just one ticket? No, there were some that were.
Charles, these are tickets for the first games, which are already scheduled.
Okay.
Like this is the group games. If you want to watch them, you can get these tickets. You can get a group of tickets at the different prices, or you can pick some. So there's value attached to them. But we need to understand the nature of the crime and how we came to know about it. It was because Magogo fleeced Ugandans, and he fleeced the first dealer he worked with. All right, so the dealer sent him money, but he didn't send over the tickets.
Yes.
So he engaged another dealer, the black market network. So it is after the original first dealer gets upset, and that's why
he blows the whistle.
So he finds somebody to work with, because he's an international black market dealer. He can't expose himself, so he finds somebody in this country to work with. So that's how he lands with Sowanyana. Sowanyana has had run-ins with Magogo for a very long period. If you gift him with this material of sending tickets on the black market which never reached you, his goods will be cooked.
Our time is out. We need to get out of here.
And don't forget, Alan Sowanyana originally is a sports journalist.
Our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much, gentlemen and lady, for making time for the show. Thank you very much to all our viewers. Of course, we're still happy. We're 57 years old as a country. We're still happy.
I should say this. There's a Somali poet called Mohammed Togani. He wrote this poem, I think in the 1990s, that in a drunken stupor, he shouted, "Independence ahoa." And he said the shout shook him up. And then he said, "Oh, white man, why don't you come back and colonize Africa?" That's the pessimism with which across the continent we think about independence nowadays.
Thank you. We shouldn't be assessing that Uganda has made some progress. We should be asking the question, are we where we ought to be? That's the question that we never discuss. Are we where we ought to be as a country?
And if we want to be where
and the people know that we are not where we ought to be.
Yes.
That's why you see the indifference around independence.
So don't be dazzled by all this about we've made so much progress. That progress needs to be counted, to be questioned about, is this where we should be? So whether you're 30 years old, you ask yourself, at 30 years, am I where I should be, where I ought to be? At 40 years, at 20 years, at 50 years, at 57 years. Because very soon we'll be catching up with the time. The entire period, the colonialist was in this country, because the colonialists were in this country for 68 years. Now we're counting only 10 years to go. 11 years to go.
And maybe after, I'm reminded of Ngwigwa Thiong'o's very satirical word. He said, "When will independence come to an end?"
It's not yet Uhuru. Our time is out. We need to get out of here. Thank you very much, Yusuf. Thank you very much, Dictor. Thank you very much, Kenneth. Thank you very much to you all, our viewers, for joining us tonight. And always, thank you very much to the production crew that stay up late to deliver the show to you. From me, have a splendid week ahead.